Yes, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance podcast. So in today's podcast, we are joined by Dave O'Sullivan, who is an absolute well of knowledge. And this was a really selfish podcast episode for me because I basically just asked all the questions that I find super interesting. Okay. I've been doing a little bit of binging. I've been binging all of Dave's work this week, going through all the podcasts that he's been a guest on, going through the stuff that he puts out himself through his own channel, and generally just trying to get a really good idea of his world being a physiotherapist, and just so I can ask better questions and kind of blend that into some really good performance chats and S&C chats. Going off on a little bit of a side note, there is a Dave Sullivan on Spotify who is the host of The Roofer Show. So it's like a really high ticket kind of businessman speaking through how to generate, extreme wealth as a roofing contractor. So I actually listened to that for about 45 minutes because that was actually pretty cool. Just listening to a different industry and how they approach building a business. But yeah, that's me going off on a tangent. In terms of this episode, really, really enjoyed it. It was sick. Some of the things we go through is Dave's experience in professional rugby and, how the team kind of made it what it was, and the group that you are around, and, kind of surrounding yourself with positive energy and people that are willing to solve problems and not just energy vampires and mood hoovers and sappuccinos and all that stuff, like actually just being around really positive people and the influence that can have on the end result, but just your well-being. So we touch on that, and that was really cool. We also get into the nervous system. Okay, we speak around the role the nervous system has in rehab, but also in performance, and how you can not trick, but kind of trick the nervous system into accepting load into tissues that you need it to do. So really, really useful. If you haven't kind of delved into some of the nervous system stuff, go check out all of Dave's work because it's super, super interesting. We speak through a little bit on protective tone. We speak about foam rolling and massage and the impact that can have on a patient or an athlete, and whether it's the correct tool or not. And we kind of get into the discussion around strategy. And then we also touch briefly on kind of a popular topic at the moment is accessing midfoot in gait. Okay, so going from heel, midfoot to toe off, and those different things, and why that is so important, and how it can really be quite impactful for you as an athlete just to being able to find that midfoot. We're not going to give you all the answers here, so there is going to be a little bit of homework for you to go around and read up on some of these areas in order to kind of upskill yourself and potentially use this in your own training or in your athletes training. All right, so as always, go and check out Dave's stuff. Okay, so say that with all the guests, go check out their stuff because they put out some great work, and just give me some feedback. Okay, if you're enjoying the guests, if you're enjoying the podcast, give it a share, let us know your feedback, and yeah, let's just get straight into it. All right, cheers. This is me and Dave O'Sullivan. Yes, Dave, how's it going, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks, Jordan. How are you?
I'm well. Usually I kind of start every podcast with a little bit of an introduction to say how much caffeine I've smashed in that day. But I'm trying to cut down because I just feel like I'm going too fast. So you're my first one where I'm kind of caffeine free.
Okay, fucking hell.
That's it. No, yeah, we'll see how that one goes. We'll see where it goes.
That's a big change. Fair play.
It's a big change, mate. I'm going to have to try and keep up on. So just to give people a little bit of an inkling, right? Before I kind of get you to do the podcast spiel of telling us who you are and all those things, I've been binging Dave O'Sullivan podcast for the last week. So I've been kind of letting it go from all the way through. So pretty much everything you've done on Spotify, I feel like I've listened to this week. So I've definitely got some good questions for you. So I think I'm going to need to stay tight upstairs.
Okay, no worries. I've had 2 flat whites already today, mate, so I'll make up for you anyways on that side of it.
I love it. Cool. Right. Do us the honors, mate. Give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, what you've been doing, what you do now, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm a physiotherapist by trade, I suppose, if you want to call it that. And yeah, my background's predominantly rugby league and rugby union. That's kind of where I grew up once I graduated. And from there then, worked worked with Leeds Rhinos, Munster Rugby, Huddersfield Giants, England Rugby League, England Rugby Union, Leicester Tigers, and just going back with Leeds Rhinos again now in a kind of a director of physio role. So predominantly, yeah, a mix between the two. And then I also have a clinic in Huddersfield, which is kind of I suppose that's the foundation upon which everything is built these days. I've got quite a good few therapists working for us and great clinicians, and the pro sport and the clinic there, my kind of playground really, where I test things, I try things out. And then on the back of that, we have a mentorship, which we mentor physios all over the world really these days. Yeah, it's well over 30 countries. It's crazy. Actually, we've got 900 plus therapists now. And, when I started this, I thought there'd be a handful, but it's just gone from strength to strength really. So yeah, very proud of that as well.
That's awesome, mate. That's awesome. I'm going to throw you under the bus. Give me, from this kind of career that you've had then, give us a little bit of, what would you say one of your proudest moments in your kind of career so far are? Like, have you got any to hand? Am I going to have to make you think a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the big one would have been obviously being in Japan. This fucking Irish guy, Stan, I remember, I think the morning of the World Cup final, I was having breakfast with Maro, Itoje, and Owen Farrell were sat at the table, and I'm eating my breakfast, my porridge. The chef Carl, he made us unreal porridge. It was like white chocolate and cranberries, and it was just, they only had that on game day. It was my favorite day of the week because of that porridge. I give him a shout out to that. But yeah, I was just sat there eating my porridge, probably my second bowl of it to be fair, and I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing sat here with these two fellas? They're about to play a World Cup final, and I'm sat here, and I don't know if you know my story. I wasn't smart enough to get into physio in Ireland. I had to go to England to study, and I still wouldn't think I'm the smartest bloke in the room. In terms of I wasn't very intellectual. I fucking hate essays and all of that kind of crap. I'm very much practical. So I think, yeah, sitting there on the day of the World Cup final is probably one of the biggest professional moments. I think is probably a big one. It's like, how the fuck have I ended up here? Really, I'd say that's probably it.
Love it, mate. I love it. I think you told something similar on, I think it might have been the Rugby Renegade podcast, and you're kind of speaking through your time in Japan and, how the group and the people that you were around at that time just kind of made it a really special place to be.
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest, that was the exact same with England Rugby League as well in Australia in 2007. And it's funny actually, if you look at any interviews that the players done and they talk about Japan, everyone says the same thing, and it was the same in Australia with the rugby league. Is when the group came together, I think was the big thing. We were such a tight group, but everyone enjoyed each other's company, and and I think that's massively undervalued as well. Where sometimes in sport you can just get so professional, but it's kind of the art of it really, where you keep the players happy. And like working with Wayne Bennett in Australia, it was like the biggest difference to him to some other coaches who are actually more inexperienced is they try to control everything, whereas he just controls the things that he needs to on the field, and then he lets the players switch off when they're not on the field. And I have a lot of respect for him with that side of it. And I think England Rugby Union is probably another level. It's very intense when you go into the environment. But even with that, the players, I think, were able to switch off and enjoy each other's company and eating meals out and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was a really good bond. And as I said, I've got memories for life now. And in both of those World Cups that, as I said, very, very fortunate to have been involved in. But I think it goes back to the foundations, especially when you're in camp for 6-8 weeks together. It's a long time to be living in each other's pockets, so to speak. But yeah, with both of those tours, I think it was the people and the just having fun, enjoying it. When you're having fun, you're enjoying it. You'll do the work, So that was a big thing.
Well, I guess, because I've been part of teams where, just the mix of people just isn't quite right. You don't gel as well, potentially egos, and, you might not be aligned to the same vision. What do you put like the success of that group atmosphere being down to then? Do you think it was just orchestrated at such a high level from a coaching standpoint? Was it a stroke of luck, or, how would you kind of say that it was such a success?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the head coaches have to get a lot of credit for that, because I think the like and when you look at coaches with World Cups, I've seen something similar before. It's like it's not just about a player, how good he is. They have to fit into the camp, and like you have to think about that. Like when a player goes into camp, is he going to be disruptive? And there was one or two players that England could have picked probably with more experience, but they didn't pick. And people are like, why the heck isn't he picking him? But you don't see that side of it when you're picking a squad. There's a lot more to consider than just the player and his talent. It's you have to have them coming into camp for 6 8 weeks. How's he going to interact? And the last thing you want in a club team or a team is a negativity or virus. Somebody with a
Mhm.
negative mindset is a virus, and it can spread through the environment like that, really. So I think that's probably the most important thing, is that you've got real positive people there. You'll always get someone have a down day, that's fine, but I think if you do have a negative kind of mindset or an influence in there, that can be absolutely disastrous, to a camp from my experience. And I think that's where, yeah, the public mightn't understand that, but actually when you sacrifice a little bit of talent for a guy that's just going to work hard and give positive energy. I have a big phrase that I believe in is, there's two people in life. There's people that's going to give you energy and going to take your energy, and you want to fucking stay away from people that take your energy. And I think that's a big part of it. That's probably the public from the outside in probably don't appreciate as much.
Yeah, for sure. There's a book that I read in university. It got given to me, and it was called The Energy Bus. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, no, I
Um,
haven't actually.
and it basically just says those things. It's a short book, and it's more kind of storytelling, but essentially energy vampires, and people that just really suck the fun out of every situation, aren't looking to problem solve, and are just wanting to mope around, and just how destructive it can be. And yeah, it was just powerful. It was like a good little story, quick and easy read. But what you said there kind of feeds me into like one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. That's around. So is in the Rugby Renegade podcast. You actually mentioned it around being a physio and working in rugby, and sometimes, well, probably most of the times, a lot of banter. There's a lot of to and fro, giving shit, taking shit, and you got to kind of keep one eye on everybody at all times, just in case. And it got me thinking around, the different types of personalities that you'll get in physiotherapy, and how some people don't fit as well from a personality standpoint, because they're not as banter orientated, or can't, be a social chameleon and blend into the room. As somebody that's been around a lot of physios, do you find that that is one of the things that holds people back from getting buy-in from players, and their ability to actually get the job done?
Yeah, definitely. I think, even on my mentorship, one of the first things I teach people is, the very first module, the very first lesson, it's rapport and authority. And I think you have to get that balance where you have to have rapport with your patient, but you also have to have authority. And I think if you lose one of those, it's very, very tricky. And then I've seen the other side where players and physios have too much rapport, and then that costs the physio authority. So it's getting that balance, I think, between the two is critical. Um, I've always played team sports, and I definitely think that helps a lot. Where if you've grown up in team environments, you're used to that, because it's like
Mm-hmm.
like fuck. I'll be honest. I wouldn't let my daughters work in rugby, in rugby union, rugby league. I'll put it that way. It's a tough environment. It's harsh. The players are brutal, especially rugby league. They're absolutely brutal, but they're nice fellas. Like, don't get me wrong. But it's a very, very challenging environment. You have to be able to take it. You have to be able to give it. So it's challenging, and I think the physios that don't have the personality skills to cope, it's interesting, because it's the exact same in private practice. If you're just like, you could be and that's kind of what I alluded to at the start. I'm not the smartest. I'm not the one like, that was really good at essays, but I could hold a conversation. I could pick up on body language. I can pick up on tone of voice. I've got people skills. I'd like to think that. And I think even in the clinic, the physios with no people skills, but they're almost they're almost scholars. Or what's the right word? They're very book heavy or book read, but actually very poor
Mm-hmm.
people skills. They're the ones that's going to struggle. And it doesn't matter if it's in a rugby environment or private practice. You could be the most well read and have all the evidence to hand, but if you can't look someone in the eye, hold a conversation, and get trust and buy-in from the patient, I think you're gonna struggle as a therapist. And that's a lot of it. It doesn't matter how good your hands on or your rehab is. The patient needs to trust you, buy into your treatment plan, and actually adhere to it. And if you don't have any of that stuff, that all happens actually before you even lay your hands on the patient, to be honest, in most instances, especially private practice as well. And if you don't have that, I think you're going to struggle. It doesn't actually matter how good even your hands on or your rehab is, if you don't have buy-in and adherence, and if they don't believe in you, then I think that's probably going to affect the outcome of it.
Hmm. Do you, I guess, teaching somebody, I guess it's hard, isn't it? Like teaching somebody to have that type of personality. Do you find that a struggle, or is it like, what would be your approach? Do you just kind of fire it down the line? Are you really kind of honest with your feedback and we build on, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, well, I think there, like, I know we were talking a little bit about Ollie, who you know and I know, not like we've hired Holly in the clinic. So, like, straight up, when I hire a therapist in the clinic, or I hire anyone, I I'm listening to them, and I'm thinking, what's my patient's going to think? How are they sounding? Are they sounding confident? Do they have people skills? And one of the things we'll do in the interview is a role play. Just do a basic assessment. Tell me the problem solution. What's the plan? And I don't care what they're like clinically, because I know I can train that, and the mentorship will do that for them. So what I'm looking for is people skills, and I'm looking for tone of voice. Will my patients actually like the person? And I'll be
Mm.
completely honest, that's what I hire first and foremost, is the person. It's a bit like what I tell the mentorship therapists: look at the person rather than the pain. It's the exact same with clinicians. I look at the person, the people skills, and that, because I know that the clinical skills I can train. But if you don't have the personality and the people skills, I think you're well. I'm not going to say you're in the wrong profession, but I think it's going to be an uphill battle. But saying that as well, like, clinicians get nervous, and that's one of the first things I put in that very first lesson is, just be aware. Like, the first step is to have awareness. So again, if you go to a heart surgeon or a neurosurgeon, they're going to come across very confident. They're going to speak slowly, they're going to pause. Whereas when people get nervous, or tone of voice, or pitch raises, or we start to speak fast. And I think it's just being aware of it. And there's a little bit of fake until you make it as well in this game. Don't get me wrong. But I think at the end of the day, I always say as well, like, clarity. With clarity comes confidence. And once you're clear on what's the problem with the patient and where you're going, I think that the confidence will follow. And confidence comes a lot both with patients, and in terms of getting back to thoughtless fearless movement, and which I'm sure we'll probably chat about later. But also, clinicians, you have to do the work. Confidence comes from doing the
Hmm.
reps, doing the work, as opposed to, you just don't wake up one day and your confidence is there. You actually have to go through the crap, so to speak, to build confidence. And I think in this day and age as well, and seeing a lot of physios, they're a different breed these days. There's not a lot of physios willing to do the work. They want everything. They want the money. They want the lifestyle. They want to sit behind a computer in a coffee shop and just work online. Which, yeah, that's the dream. But, like, life doesn't work like that. You have to put in the hours to get there to that point. And as I said, like, I've gone in and out of sporting teams, and I've done the whole, like, come away from the clinic and work online with the online business, and I'm going straight back into sport again, because first and foremost, I'm a clinician. We get into this business because we like people, we like helping people, and I think the person to person interaction is very important as well.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. That's a great answer. And I think it definitely feeds me into the next thing. And, speaking through thoughtless, fearless movement. And this was on the Jake Turo podcast, and you were speaking through tendinopathy. And there's a few little phrases that I wrote down straight away because I just really liked them. And it was getting the nervous system to feel safe in the movements that you're doing. And there was another one of, you haven't just got an ankle injury, you've got a brain injury as well. So I just wanted to kind of talk around, like, the role of the nervous system with injury and rehab, and how you're actually going about mending this nervous system and building it into what we want, in sport and performance.
Yeah, I think, like, obviously, to give credit where credit's due, Louis Gifford was the guy that came up with or certainly where I first came across thoughtless fearless movement in his books Aches and Pains, and he's been a big influence on me. His books, in terms of, I was seeing all this stuff, like, with Leeds Rhinos, with Munster Rugby, even with Huddersfield Giants. I was seeing stuff, and I think I'm very lucky to work in professional sport where you see guys on a whole spectrum, whereas in private practice you just tend to see patients that have have the end range where there's pain, whereas athletes come in and they've niggles where it's not quite pain, it's not enough to stop training, but it's a discomfort, or like what we might call a prediction error these days, where the nervous system's picking up this unpleasant experience, but it's not quite pain. So I've kind of, obviously been lucky to look at all of that side, and that's where I started getting interested really in the nervous system and going, actually, I think there's a lot more to it than just strength. Because as I said, you go into a rugby club and these guys are strong. Um, but ultimately, if the nervous system chooses not to build tension, then it's not going to build tension, and you'll see these funky little shifts, and they'll be doing something with their rib cage or their neck or something, or their big toe, or they won't be loading their big toe. So the nervous system will always find ways to protect things. And just since I've been exposed to it, it's a bit like, once you see it, you can't not see it anymore. And I think because I've just been focusing looking at the person, and I almost I actually have it behind me there. It's like the iceberg analogy, where obviously you've got above the water, you've got the conscious, and then below the water, you've got the subconscious. So when I rehab an injury, I'm always trying to go below the water. That's what I'm trying to access. And that's what we do with the rehab really, is we want to put them in positions and situations where they've no choice but to tolerate the load. And again, we can use principles such as like challenging the base of support to do that, where if they don't take load through the tissue, they're going to fall over. And that we can create a little bit of a threat, which gets the subconscious engaged, because now there is a threat response. So it's like shit, and with subtle exercises, like I said, you'll see the silliest slouch and stuff that we put on Instagram and bits like that. And I put one up with Kevin Sinfield recently, and like that little start position, it's that subtle shift. You'll see their whole autonomic nervous system change, their breathing rate changes, they're concentrating, they're focused, and they're the clues in everyday life with patients that I know now, okay, I've got the subconscious mind interested in these exercises. Whereas if they're just going through the motions and they're not engaged and it's too easy, then it's it's like borderline. I would almost say it's a waste of time doing a lot of these exercises with patients. And I had a guy on Tuesday actually, and he, rehabbing him, and he's had a few injuries now, and he said, he goes, I don't mind doing these exercises because I feel like I'm working hard and I'm getting something out of them, whereas the stuff I'd done before, it's just boring and I struggled. So I think that's where the adherence, the motivation, because they're like I almost use the Goldilocks approach with this as well. And with the subconscious mind and the nervous system, you have to use a Goldilocks approach where you can't do too much and you can't do too little. You just have to have the right amount of stress. And then usually then the nervous system adapts very, very quickly. And that's how we can get quick changes, which is good because we're not waiting weeks and weeks for strength to kick in. Things can change really quickly. So that's very much how I approach it. Whereas I said, everything I'm doing, I'm looking at the iceberg analogy, and everything under the water. That's what I'm trying to influence. And usually when you do that, then the above the water changes in terms of their confidence, their movement qualities, the speed of movement that they do when you reassess them. All of that stuff kind of takes care of itself. So yeah, it's a little bit of a different way of looking at it, but I think I almost see it as a prerequisite to strength. All of this stuff,
Okay.
where we get this stuff right, then the strength just keeps going. So like your Franz Bosch type stuff, he would have had a good influence on me, but I think that's very much end range. That's like top level stuff. And I actually don't think a lot of athletes are good enough to do a lot of his stuff without cheating and locking up in their back and doing bits. So I very much see my stuff as a graded exposure to get him to his stuff. So I almost see my stuff as the rehab version of kind of his approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess, just kind of going back to that then, you kind of spoke said how the nervous system is just really sneaky. It's a sneaky bastard. It's going to find a way of avoiding that troublesome area. And your way of basically, you're just forcing it through good biomechanics and good awareness of movement and how you actually load tissues to overcome that and make it feel safe. Is that essentially what it is then? Just really good awareness of exercises and anatomy?
Yeah, so I think if you look in the literature, like a lot of the motor adaptations literature, that's going to give you a lot of clues there. And what they found is you'll still use the muscle, but what happens is the direction that the load is going through changes through the muscle. So obviously I'm not saying that a muscle isn't going to fire. That's just stupid because you'd fall on your arse. But what they tend to do is some fibers of that muscle isn't going to fire, or the nervous system. So I think one of the studies was they'd done like knee extension, and with knee pain patients, they injected a noxious stimulus into the knee, and they were still able to maintain the same force. But what changed was just the direction that the load was going through the knee joint. So again, the nervous system finds a way to do the job, same force, but just the direction of the load changed. And then you start looking, okay, why is the medial meniscus irritated, or why is the lateral meniscus irritated, or why is this part of the kneecap worn and torn versus this, and then you start to look at their injury history. And again, that's, for me, it's where it all starts with the subjective of the injury history. What's the adaptations, or what are the movement habits that have developed? And then now what I'm seeing, is this just an alteration, or is it just a movement habit that they've developed? And obviously, if there's a mechanism of injury, that helps a lot, contact injury. But for non-contact injuries, very much, if you map out their injury history, you can kind of see the pieces in front of you, really, 9 times out of 10.
Got you. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess you are just problem solving, aren't you? You're getting the story and you're kind of thinking, does this equal this? And, gives you an opportunity to explore different avenues. Hi guys, I'm just going to take a brief break in today's podcast to talk to you about the Adapt online strength and conditioning coaching service. At Adapt, we put the athlete first and make sure that the whole program is set up around them, their goals, their sport, and their lifestyle to achieve the best possible performances. Our aim is to deliver an elite level coaching experience that typically isn't always commercially available if not part of a professional club or performance pathway system. We communicate with our athletes on a weekly and sometimes daily basis, making changes in technique and making alterations to the program based on how you're performing on any given day. We also bring in experts from psychologists, nutritionists, and physiotherapists for online educational workshops to make sure we are giving you all the tools necessary to excel in your sport. So if you're looking to take your physicality to the next level and want to invest in yourself, head over to the website at adaptstrength.co.uk for more information, including some success stories of our current athletes, or drop me a message to set up a chat to discuss the options. Hope you're enjoying today's podcast, so let's get back to it. Where does protective tone, that term protective tone, can you kind of talk to me a little bit about that and what it is, what it's not, and does that fall into, the nervous system analogy we just used?
Yeah, so like the protective tone, it's a very general term, if I'm being completely honest. It's I'm sure there's, the purists would probably slate me for using that. But to me, protective tone is just where the nervous system, for example, I had a patient recently, and I'll talk a lot about second order, third order consequences to what we do. And I had a patient with back pain, and then you do a bit of hands-on treatment on their back, and then they get off the bed and they're actually worse. So when they go to touch their toes, they're rigid, they're even slower. Okay, so again, the tone has increased in the muscles, and it's a bit like if we get a fright, or if we tighten up, or what's it called, fight or flight. So again, when we look at that, and that's obviously an extreme version of it, everything tenses, we have increased tone, we move rigid, we move slower, we move more cautious. So that to me would kind of encompass, there's a lot of protective tone around the nervous system. Whereas if that person's low back tightened up because maybe they've got poor load tolerance through, say, the hamstring, for example, if I increase load tolerance through the hamstring, so I maybe done some hands-on treatment and a couple of rehab exercises to improve load tolerance there, subconscious went, okay, it's actually safe to tolerate load on this, now I'm going to use it a bit more. Then I get the patient off the bed and I retest the toe touch. Then they're going to move, they're going to touch their toes a lot quicker, a lot freer. That rigidity around the rib cage is relaxed. So we've kind of undone a lot of that protective tone. So that's my interpretation. That's kind of how I see it. So, and I think that's where second order thinking is really important before we influence tissues. So again, I've got a patient last Tuesday, and she's got back pain, for quite a few years now. And in her history, she's got a right hip labral tear. We have an arthrogram, we know that. The GPs dismissed it, said, no, the hip's not causing your back pain. And her back is like just 2 iron rods, like the protective tone around her extensors, it just won't let go. So when she sits, she gets a lot of pain. So I went, okay, I'm not going to treat your low back because I'm not going to be able to out wrestle the nervous system. So increase load tolerance to her right hip. We do some stuff for the right hip. her toe touch improves, she sits a lot more relaxed. So that's an example to me there, where the more load tolerance we get through her hip, we decrease the protective tone around the lower back. So we use that second order consequences to get a good outcome rather than a negative outcome like I would have done in the past, where I would have just gone straight to the lower back, if that makes sense. So that's where I think it's important that we understand the why behind everything we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. And I think in this day and age, with so many exercises out there, there's a lot of exercises out there that can make quick changes. And that's really with the diaphragm PDF, what I've tried to do is try to get people to understand why stretching the diaphragm can increase your shoulder range of motion, can increase hip flexion, so that people understand it, as opposed to using it almost as a party trick. Because I think that's very dangerous if we do that, where we almost give them too much range, and then if they haven't earned it, they usually tighten up and flare up. And I've seen that firsthand myself. And it's a bit like, if I give you £1,000 and you haven't earned it, you're probably going to go and blow it on the world's best cup of coffee. Whereas if you work hard to earn that £1,000, you're not going to spend that £1,000 on crap. So same kind of concept with the nervous system. I think if the nervous system doesn't earn it, it doesn't appreciate it, it's probably not going to keep it. Whereas if you give it without earning it, I think that's a dangerous game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things that I kind of picked up on there is, I guess, social media and research is always kind of one of those things that's kind of to and fro, and you can see so much on there. And obviously the algorithm and the way Instagram and the internet works, it kind of feeds you those things based off what you're interested in and what you view. So you could easily be swayed into, at least just looking through what I kind of see on social media, going hands-on with patients and athletes and foam rolling and self-myofascial release and all those things. There seems to be that trend of like, it's not useful, it's super useful, it's everything, it's nothing. So you do, I'm guessing you do use hands-on, and, is there specific times when you think it's more appropriate, less appropriate? Is some of those methods I just mentioned worthless versus the others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, and I always say knowledge isn't power unless you've got a way to take all your knowledge, organize it, and actually implement it. And I think if you understand, and that's why I always like what I really teach in the mentorship is a structure and a system. And I teach on a strategy level first and foremost. And yeah, I teach my tactics, I teach my assessments, my hands-on, my rehab, all of that stuff. But on the first level, I teach this is the strategy. This is why I'm doing this to get to here. And when you understand where you're trying to get the patient on a graded exposure ladder, then you can use whatever you want within reason to get them to the next level. And there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, which I think is actually the beauty of our profession. And I think the stuff gets slated because it's almost a bit like a bazooka as opposed to a sniper rifle, where we're just trying to get everything with one thing, as opposed to like dry needling gets a bad rap. And I don't use a lot of dry needling, if I'm being honest. And I've had a shoulder issue. I done something stupid during the summer. I went on a program in German volume training, incline bench, 10 sets of 10. So again, it's all in my story. And I've had shoulder pain for ages. And I've got like the clinicians up in the clinic to treat me and stuff like that. And I just can't get rid of this last bit. I was getting sick shit of it. And so got a needle, dry needle my pec, because it's in the history. I knew the pec was involved in this. Dry needle my pec the other night. And for the first time in 4 or 5 months, my shoulder feels a lot better in terms of the range, that last little bit. So, but I wouldn't dry needle a lot, but at that time I was like, fuck it, I'll just do it. I'll try it here. The hands-on treatment isn't getting it great. And there might be, 5-6 times a year I might dry needle, like deep obturator and turnus. If I want to influence those muscles or influence the pelvic floor and I might need to do that, then I may dry needle. But I'm doing it 4 or 5 times a year. I'm very clear on what I'm trying to achieve with it. And I'm also very clear on what I'm expecting with an outcome, as opposed to, I think a lot of people, they just stick the needles in and hope for the best. And I think that's dangerous. So again, that's just an example of dry needle. For foam rolling, again, I think if you understand why you're doing it, what you're doing, and how it's going to help the patient, then by all means use it. And I think I always said a rehab exercise or an intervention, it's a vehicle to get the patient to solve problems. So again, the patient has a problem, we're trying to solve a problem. What you're using should be a vehicle to solve the problem. It shouldn't be the be all and end all. And I think if you look at it like that, or certainly that's the way I try to look at it, then it's a bit of it's all right. And as I said, hands-on treatment, I do use hands-on, but straight after it's a bit like what we talked about, this low back patient. I'll do a bit of hands-on, but I'm straight away then I'm increasing load tolerance with an actual exercise if I need to. And sometimes I don't use hands-on with a patient if it's not appropriate, but I'm not tied to it. And I think that's the
Yeah.
thing, is once you have clarity, you have freedom, where you're not like, if someone said to me tomorrow, you can never use hands-on again. All right, it's a shame. There's a couple of patients that I could probably get from A to B a little bit quicker, but it's not the end of the world. I treated a lot of patients during the lockdown online, Zoom, and I got great results with them, and I got them to do some of the hands-on themselves if they needed to. So, I'm not tied to it. And I think if the most dangerous number is one, and I think if you've got one thing that you're relying on all the time, I think that's where it gets a little bit dangerous. So to go back to the original kind of point, I think, use this stuff, but understand that it's just a vehicle to get you to the next level. And there's always going to be one patient that's not going to respond to it. There's always going to be one patient that won't respond to hands-on, to dry needling, to foam rolling. So that's where you need to really go, okay, what am I actually trying to do here? And it's quite empowering, that, because when you focus your mind, then, like, I design rehab exercises based on trying to solve problems. So it's like, right, how can I get some load through this tissue here? And then that's where I go and I try to design a rehab plan, as opposed to just coming up with all these fancy exercises and then I'm trying to do 100 different variations. It's like, how can I get to A to B in the most simple and direct path? And the more these days, more experience I get, the less I use, as opposed to adding things, if that makes sense. Just keeping it simple and using less rather than using more.
For sure. I think just my thoughts of just listening to you speak there is just well rounded. You it's not a hammer and a nail situation. You've got other things you can draw upon. You've got this vast kind of toolbox, and I think that's so important. And I guess the original point was kind of speaking around social media and information and how it kind of lands in our lap sometimes. And I think sometimes that is just because as human beings, we look for one answer, and if we look to marketing, it's, okay, are you a big foot guy? Are you a foam rolling guy? Well, no, I'm not either of those things. I'm get a results guy. I guess that's kind of what you're saying there, is just find the thing that's going to help you get to where you need to be.
Yeah, and the thing that I've realized now, and probably 2015, it was a big learning curve for me, or an aha moment, is there is no magic bullet. I wish there was. As in, there's not one thing that's going to help every patient, because pain is so complex. There's so much stuff contributing to the pain experience. It's not just the peripheral tissues either. There's thoughts, there's beliefs, there's attitudes. There's so much involved in a pain experience, that I think it'd be foolish to think that there is one technique that's going to do it. And that's why I like the Aches and Pains book, to be honest. With Louis Gifford, and even in that, he mentions he done massage and hands-on bits, and he done rehab. But the big thing really is, I don't think any technique is ever going to out muscle a graded exposure, because that is the thing really, that we just need to expose them gradually to the thing we're trying to get them back to. And again, that goes back to the nervous system of the Goldilocks approach. Whereas you might have the right exercise at the wrong time, and it's just too much for the nervous system. Nervous system doesn't like it, tightens back up again. Wasn't the wrong exercise, it was just the wrong exercise. I was the right exercise at the wrong time. And I think when you start looking at it like that, or certainly when I've started to look like that, it gives me a lot more reassurance that actually, I know there's a lot of quotes like, there is no bad exercise. It's understanding what you're trying to achieve with the exercise. And that goes back to principles rather than tactics, or strategy rather than tactics. If you understand your strategy, it doesn't really matter the tactic to a point. There's loads of ways to get the patient from A to B, I think is the key thing there. But yeah, I get it. It's frustrating, and I do feel sorry for young physios these days. And I think there's a lot of young physios where they're afraid to touch patients now, and they're confused. And like a few years ago, the big thing was pain science. It was like, we need to be doing loads and loads of pain science with patients. And then therapists come into the mentorship. It's like, I'm trying to build a private practice. I'm trying to build this. I'm trying to do the right thing that I should be doing. I'm telling patients that, all about pain science education, and all they're saying to me is, you're saying it's all in my head, and that's the bit where I think it gets frustrating for clinicians. It's the ideal is on social media, but the real world, when there's a patient in front of you, it's a completely different story. And I think that's the thing that frustrated me. I'm kind of numb to it these days. like someone like every month someone's going to have a pop at me or email me and they'll have a big emotional response or leave a shitty comment. I'm over it at this stage, and it used to annoy me, but it's
Yeah.
like there's always going to be someone there that's going to have an issue with it. And I think at the end of the day, for me, I know I'm comfortable that if there's a patient in front of me, I've got confidence I'll get results with them, and I'm not tied to doing hands-on, or I'm not tied to doing rehab. That, as you said, I look at the person, I've got a structure and a system, and I'll figure it out. And do I get every patient right? Absolutely not. There is some patients where, as I said, that I can't get right, but there's an opportunity then for me to go, okay, where do I need to upskill in order to do that? And a lot of times then it is actually the attitudes, the beliefs, and building confidence, and it's not actually hands-on that I need to get better at, but a lot of the more psychosocial stuff. And that's where then is like, fuck, do you go into a psychology degree then, and it gets a bit trickier at that point.
Yeah. I think just kind of listening to you speak there, mate, it's so cool. By the way, like I wanted to be a physio when I was younger and just didn't, for whatever reason, kind of went down an S&C route, but always kind of been really involved in physiotherapy and like reading around the topics, and probably as a result only have a little bit of the story, and that's probably a dangerous thing sometimes. I don't have the full immersed experience and all the everything that comes with doing a degree and being in a private practice or just a practice in general. But just listening to you speak there, how it's so much bigger than, I've been to a physio a few times and I've had the cop out answers of, okay, it's 3 sets of 10 clams. It's the classic, isn't it? It's the easy way, it seems, and for some people that will be the appropriate exercise, I guess, but it seems like it's lacking that what's the word? The graded exposure piece that you just said there. I've had athletes in the past come to me and say, look, I've got, a really bad, I don't know, hip flexor for whatever reason. I said, okay, we need to get you to a physio to actually diagnose it and see what we can actually do and just give me some direction. And they won't go to a physio because they're like, I know I will just get 3 sets of clams from this guy. And it's really disheartening sometimes, and you get good S&C coaches, you get bad S&C coaches, you get good physios, bad physios. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the art of our profession is clinical reasoning and it's critical thinking, and I think that kind of goes back to this instant gratification these days, where we want instant gratification, we want to do a hands-on technique, or we want to just give an exercise and that's it. What I think I heard a great quote is like 2.5% of the population actually think, 2.5% think they think, and then 95% of people would rather die than think. And I think that's probably an appropriate quote. Again, don't quote me, I don't know if that's the exact percentages, but a lot of people these days, that it consumes so much energy to actually have to think. They'd rather just watch a YouTube video and give it to a patient. And like I've gone through full cycle where, like, when I started my careers, everything was glutes. Yeah, give glute, the glutes are to blame for everything. And I'm sure it'll go around full cycle again. And I think it comes back to that critical thinking, actually clinical reasoning, and understanding the why behind everything you're doing. And as I said, a lot of therapists that I can see, and again, I've mentored over 900 now, so I feel somewhat qualified. I speak to therapists day in, day out. We've got clinicians in my own clinic, so this isn't like just a statement I'm throwing out, but a lot of clinicians, they're operating on a tactical level where they're just focusing on techniques as opposed to a strategy. And that's where the structure, the system, your strategy of what you're trying to achieve with a person, I think that's the bit where we as clinicians need to get to that level, as opposed, and then all of these arguments about tactical, dry needling, hands-on, hands-off, foam rolling, it becomes irrelevant because we're working on a strategic level as opposed to a tactical. So that's my opinion. That's what I can see nowadays. And the other big thing is, which I think is getting better, is it's all about a diagnosis. So I think therapists are setting themselves up to fail because we're going into the objective assessment looking to make a diagnosis. And when you go in solely focused on a diagnosis, you're tunnel visioned on the diagnosis and you're not seeing the person in front of you. So what I like to do is go, okay, what's not happening, that if it was happening, it would take the pain experience away. And when you go into an objective assessment looking at it like that, you're going to know all of a sudden, as Louis Gifford see, you're going to get a shopping basket of things that actually isn't doing its job. And now you can start to see the wood from the trees and go, actually, there's a lot of stuff here I can do with that patient, as opposed to just, okay, you've back pain, diagnosis, here are some glute exercises. So you've got knee pain, here are some glute exercises. Whereas you can see, oh, why aren't they loading their big toe there? You know, what's in their history for that? Why are they doing that when I ask them to reach their hand down their leg? Why are they doing that when they extend? Why are they doing that when they lunge? Now you can start to pick up a lot of things that you can work on. So it's a subtle shift in focus, but that's my gut feeling. I think is a lot of therapists, they're setting themselves up to fail because they're focusing too much on the diagnosis and the objective without actually focusing on, as I said, what's not doing its job, because that's quite empowering then to you as a therapist, because it's, number one, it's specific to the patient, but number two, you've got a lot of things to work on. And even if you're not confident in the diagnosis, because I don't have MRI eyes or anything like that, you know, and I can think that this is it, but I'm not quite sure. So even if you're not sure of a diagnosis, there's still a lot of things you can do in the first couple of sessions to help the patient. And very often when you address those, the pain experience reduces anyway. So it's kind of win-win for the patient. So subtle shift in focus, I think, mindset. And yeah, like I think things are slightly getting better, but in regards to how we're teaching in university, and some of my best mates are lecturers, and I'll speak to them, and they're tied to, because HPC registration and bits, they have to teach a certain curriculum, so their hands are tied. But you know, I think it is getting a little bit better. But I think it's, the other danger then is you've got, like, my kids, like, fuck, they're just, again, I don't want to kind of bring this into a phone thing, but it's just a different generation where their heads are stuck in a phone without, you know, and is that something like people skills these days? And, you know, you look in a waiting room and everyone's down in their phone, no one's talking to each other. So again, I'm going way off topic here, and again, I don't want to like blame phones for everything, but I think hopefully you get my point there. I think instant gratification tactics, focusing on the diagnosis, if we revert that to strategy, focusing on a shopping basket, like Louis Gifford mentions, a subtle shift, but it really empowers therapists, and it gives you then an opportunity to look at a person.
For sure. That's quality, mate. That's quality. I have one final little piece that I want to kind of touch on. And that is around, so I did the Gary Ward Anatomy and Motion, you know, around foot and gait and those types of things. And it seems to be a little bit more popular at the moment, with, you know, finding pronation and access to the midfoot and all those types of things. Can you kind of talk around what is the importance of the midfoot, and why is it kind of like being brought to the forefront a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I done a bit with Chris years ago. So Chris came up and, you know, trained me in a lot of Gary stuff. I like Gary, and I brought a player down to Gary years ago and stuff. And I think the midfoot stuff's important because you get everything doing its job. Usually what people want to do is, this probably goes back more to motor adaptations, where if somebody wants to feel safe, they're going to usually either push through their heels or they'll lock their back up. Usually when they hyperextend or they lock their back up, that'll push them onto their toes. So very often, whereas when we have the midfoot and when we can access midfoot, that's where then we're going to be in much more balance, where the center of gravity is going to be over the basis support, so to speak. So whereas I think a lot of people skip that, and when we lack midfoot intent, then we're not going to be loading soleus and distal hamstrings as much. So again, it goes back to this way that the nervous system will find a way to cheat, where we can almost skip the midfoot, we go heel toe without actually generating any intent. So the classic one is sit to stand. You know, you get 9-10 people up to stand up from seated, 9 of them will push through their heel. You know, they'll actually dorsiflex their foot to stand up instead of plantar flexing, you know, to actually push into the floor these days. And again, just a lot of different habits that we've developed, again, too. You know, I don't want to say it's certain causes or anything like that, you know, because I think that'd be unfair. So I think a lot of people, they don't use their midfoot, but I think the power of getting access to the midfoot again is, as I said, it just gets everything doing its job again. It just restores the ability for everything to do its job, from the soleus, the distal hamstrings. That'll delay any extension, allow the hip to extend a little bit more there. So I think that's something that's really important. And as I said, when I was looking at things, I got really interested in the anatomy, and then I started looking at the hamstrings, and I was just seeing these big tendons, you know, coming down into the knee, and I was like, that means something there. Why have we got these big tendons here? And that's when I started to get, okay, how can I get more midfoot? Or how can I get them active more? And then it was like I was looking at the bridges and stuff like that. I was like, it doesn't make sense to be pushing through the heel when you're doing glute bridges. And then when we started to push through the midfoot to get the soleus and the hamstring, that's when then things started to change quite quickly for me with patience and pain. So it kind of developed there with the midfoot bridge stuff. Then went to a Peter O'Sullivan course. He was doing a lot of stuff with patients bilateral. And I was like, what's happening here? And again, he was doing very, very similar stuff. He was just getting them onto that midfoot where we get more load through the legs and then the low back would relax. So kind of developed from there. Like Gary and them, what do they call it? Sorry, I forget the terminology. It's a suspension where he goes from heel to toe and stuff like that. And again, there's getting weight on the midfoot. So I think when you actually look at a lot of people, they're teaching the same kind of stuff, just slightly different ways. So I think that's really important. And when you look at high level rehab, when you decelerate, and when we're about to change direction, you want load through that midfoot where the laces are down to the toes. You don't want someone stuck on their heels, because if you're going into contact and you're on your heels, that's not going to end well. Or if you need to change direction, you need that midfoot. And the other thing then, you could even see it yourself as you sit here, or if the listener is sitting here, if your knee goes in and out and the weight's through the heel, your knee is a lot of movement there. As if you squash an orange to your midfoot and then you let your knee go in, you're going to have a lot more control over the knee there. You're going to decelerate a lot better. So from an injury prevention point of view, I think it's important as well for ACLs, obviously, and stuff like that as well, because you want that distal hamstring to protect the ACL. So I think that's important. As I said, I think a lot of people, it was around, again, I don't want to blame Mike Boyle and them, but I think there was a lot of people getting knee pain. Then this vertical tibia kind of came in, where everybody was pushing through their heels to hip extend. And I was teaching that for a long time. And I was just like, it doesn't make sense that when you actually look at gait, and PRI and Gary and stuff like that, is like when the hip extends, the weight goes onto the midfoot and the forefoot. And then I was like, so every time we hip extend, we can't be on our heels. Because if you actually walk on your heels, the first thing you're going to have to do is extend your back a lot to achieve fake hip extension. So again, it's all neurology, isn't it? So it's like, okay, when the hip extends, the weight goes on the midfoot. When you're going to hip flexion, you heel strike. So, and then I just started to look at foot pressures and go, okay, well, every time the hip extends, I want my patients to get onto the midfoot and forefoot. So I think it probably evolved through all of that. It probably evolved through gait first, and then, as I said, just looking at other bits and pieces as well.
That's awesome, mate. Awesome. Cool. I want to let you go, mate. I know you've got a meeting coming up soon, but I just want to thank you for your time. That was absolutely quality. You've blown my mind a little bit. I'm going to have to go back through and watch it. And I think for anybody looking to kind of delve into all the stuff that you've kind of mentioned there, so the midfoot and, distal hamstrings and all those types of things, where should people go?
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed it, actually. There's a lot of stuff there that I haven't really discussed on podcasts. So it's quite a different podcast, which is nice to do. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for having me, Jordan. Our website's the gotophysio.com. So again, the blogs, there's a lot of stuff on there that you can check out. The midfoot bridge, soleus slouch. Instagram, I put a lot of stuff on. I think it's Dave O'Sullivan Physio. I think that's the Instagram. I probably should change the handle of that, really. But yeah, you'll get me on Instagram there if you send me a message, and I can send you some stuff as well in terms of resources and stuff. I've got a lot of free trainings and stuff like that. So they're probably the two best places to grab me.
Awesome. I'll do all the heavy lifting for them. I'll put all that in the show notes below so they can just click straight through. But yeah, I just want to thank you again, mate. That was absolutely quality. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Adapt Performance podcast. Let me know what you thought about the episode by leaving a review or sending me a direct message. I'm all for receiving the honest feedback to make sure the episodes grow and get better and better. Like, share, subscribing and following all goes a long way to making sure the podcast reaches the right people. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.